I know Miss Randy's got some cool stuff planned for you today, so that's pretty good. I like it. Well, everybody doing all right this morning? Okay, 3 of you. That's good. All right, so the rest of you will be doing good by the end of this. And so today we're going to be picking up where we left off last week. We're going to be talking about missing pieces, but I want to kind of set it up with a little bit of a story today for those art people in the room. If you've ever heard of a guy named Claude Monet. Monet, does that ring a bell to anybody? So Monet was a famous French impressionist, and so he painted many paintings, and one of the ones that ended up being the most famous were his water lilies. I think we may have a picture up there somewhere. Yep, oh, there it is, good. But this is a picture of his wisteria. Now, Monet, I'll give you a little art lesson real quick because I just learned about it myself, but Monet spent a lot of time in his gardens, and especially towards the later end of his life, and he just wanted to paint as much as he could, specifically the wisteria and the water lilies, because it gave him a sense of peace. And he had this idea for something called the Grande Decoration. That's my French. That's as good as it gets. So the Grande Decoration, right? So, and he decided what he was going to do is make all these paintings. There's going to be this long row of paintings, and then as you walk down, you felt like you were in the garden. So you had the water lilies below and the wisteria above. And he donated these paintings to the government. Well, after his death, like much things go, that just kind of got forgotten. And they didn't display it properly. They just kind of left them hanging out in his workshop, which tends to happen a lot of times. So the original purpose never was found. And even after World War II, after some bombings that occurred and things like that, a lot of the paintings were lost. And so at the end of it, there were several water lilies and about 8 wisteria that were saved. And they were allowed to be hung up, and different people just bought them up fairly cheaply, especially the wisteria. For whatever reason, wisteria was not as exciting as water lilies. I don't know why that is, but so they bought them up. And so in 1961, The Hague bought a wisteria painting, this one, and they were pretty excited about it. And then as of June of this year, they decided they were going to restore it and do a Monet presentation, take it off the wall. And what they found was, as they were examining it, there were little holes in it. And it made them question a little bit, and there was some glass, and so they assumed it was probably from the bombing in World War II. And so they, in the art world, there's something called a conservator. We'll speak a little bit about that in a second. And what they do is they conserve or restore these pieces of art. And as they took it off the wall and they started looking at it, they said, now that there's a tear in it, I can see something. And so they basically put it underneath a light, and they realized that underneath this picture of a wisteria was a water lily. That the original painting underneath was one of his famous water lily works. And all this time they thought they had a not so exciting Monet, when really they had a priceless Monet. Because underneath it was the water lilies, and on top was the wisteria. And so it surprised them all because they were shocked by it. And one of the things that I really like this quote, it says from the lady who restored it, she said, there's no obvious reason why he would reuse the canvas. I want you to catch that real quick. There's no obvious reason why he would reuse the canvas. The most logical reason for me was that he wanted to try something new, and he wasn't sure yet where it would end. I want us to think about that in terms of our spirituality and our walk, that God started with a water lily maybe in you, and then as things progressed, as things took place, that slowly but surely you felt less of value, that maybe something was taken away from you, but God started something new on your canvas. God didn't throw you away from the mistakes you made. He didn't throw you away because you were missing pieces. He didn't cast you aside. He saw something beautiful. He said, I'm going to restore it. So underneath what may be something different than what you expected is still something wonderful and something of great value, because ultimately you hold the same value as you did whenever the day you were born. And so today I want us to understand that God is ready to restore us. He's ready to do something new in us, and that even though we don't always expect it, God is willing to do that. He's willing to reuse that canvas that he started with. And isn't that a good thing? Isn't that nice? Isn't that amazing that God is creative enough to do that? So today we're going to be talking about restoration. We're going to be talking about those missing pieces and how God restores it. We left off last week with more pieces missing from the puzzle than today. We're only missing one today. But ultimately, God takes those missing pieces, and he's taught us, as we showed last week, how to live with the missing pieces. But today we're going to talk about how he can restore those pieces in our life, so that as much as we're still a water lily, we become a new wisteria. We become something new that others can appreciate and others see the value in. So today that's our goal, and that's the good news, is that God still loves us even though we have a missing piece or two. So today I want us to take a look at this idea of restoration, because this is something God's done since the beginning of time, right? God created the earth. And within that, we saw the falling of the world, right? We saw the falling of sin, and God restored Adam and Eve. He restored the world after the flood, right? He restored the temple. He restored the Israelites. He restored the disciples when they failed. And today we're going to continue with our story of Mephibosheth and show how he was restored as well. But God can use you by filling in those spaces and restoring the original image. And so I want us to kind of think about this idea of art. I know puzzles and art are two different things, but a lot of puzzles are based after art, right? I mean, how many of you have ever done a Mona Lisa puzzle or something like that? All right, I haven't, but maybe you have. And so a lot of I think art and puzzles go well together. And as I said before, in the art world, there's something called an art conservator. And that's their entire job, which I thought was very fascinating, is that they examine and restore various pieces of art and artifacts. So they take these pieces that come in that are damaged or broken or have seen rougher times, and then to make sure that they continue, because you imagine that a lot of this paint and a lot of the paintings and art over time is going to crumble. It's going to start showing wear and tear. So someone has to go in and keep it nice and fresh so you can see it in the museums and all that good stuff. So an art conservator, that's their job. But I want us to look at this as part of their job description. It says, if they do a proper job, the original intent of the piece should be able to be viewed for many generations to come. If they do a proper job, the original intent of the piece should be able to be viewed by many generations to come. So today I want us to look at that God is the ultimate conservator, that the original intent of the piece is still there. That whenever you opened up your box, whenever you were a child and everything was exactly where it needed to be and you had all those plans, and life maybe took away a piece, or another person took away a piece, or some of the decisions you made took away a piece, that ultimately God can still restore those things. He can take it back to the original intent of what it once was, so that for generations to come, they can see the value. I think our heart a lot of times is that once that's gone, we'll never get it back. Once that's gone, that it's just leaving a legacy of failure or a legacy of problems, when God says, no, what I'm going to do is show you how I can restore that image so that you can speak into the generations to come. You can make a difference in people if you're willing to allow God to restore those pieces. Just like today, as I put these in, you really can't see, but apparently how I glued this puzzle together, the other pieces didn't quite fit right. But there's a reason for that. I think it was almost God's way of saying, sometimes the way we think it should go doesn't quite go exactly like we think it should, right? It can change on us. So today I want us to call back to Deuteronomy 30:35, if you remember this scripture from last week. And here's what it says. It says, as God being the ultimate conservator, here's what he says. God your God will restore everything you lost. He'll have compassion on you. He'll come back and pick up the pieces from all the places where you were scattered, no matter how far away you end up. God your God will get you out of there and bring you back to the land your ancestors once possessed. It will be yours again, and he will give you a good life. We need to be reminded that God has a desire to show that original intent in everything that we do. And so we're going to go back to our friend Mephibosheth to kind of talk about his life as an example for us. And so you may remember last week, I'll give you a quick recap because it's been a week, right? So you're like, oh, Mephibosheth, who's that, right? So, but Mephibosheth was the daughter. It's not true. It's not true at all. He was the son of Jonathan. I don't know where daughter came from, but so he was the son of Jonathan, and Saul and Jonathan. So Saul was king. Jonathan was in line for the throne. That meant Mephibosheth would have been next in line for the throne. And as you may remember, Saul made a lot of not so great choices, and David ends up becoming king. And in the process of Saul and Jonathan being killed, Mephibosheth was carried away and dropped and fell upon by his nurse and was crippled for life. And he went into hiding because he knew that since he would be next in line for the throne, that more than likely they were going to come after him and kill him. So he hid, and he hid in squalor until David came along and became king and then said, I want to restore this back to you. And we talked about last week how Mephibosheth had all the excuses that come with that, right? He had situations like falling down that took away parts of his life. His insecurity was something that he had taken away from himself. And then ultimately he was betrayed by one of his servants, by one of the people that should have been taking care of him. So we kind of left off last week with Mephibosheth not being in a great spot, right? But today we're going to talk about how he was restored and how the example that he set can be part of how we can learn. So I want us to look at this from the idea of the conservator, the God being the conservator. And so today I want to say that our conservator will do three things. And the first thing is our conservator will reshape or shape the edges of our original intent. Will shape the edges or reshape the edges of our original intent. Now, I don't know about you, but this is how I fix most things, right? If there's empty, some sort of electrical cord that's loose, you just duct tape it, right? If something's not working, you lose a screw, you duct tape it. Just a minute ago, the headset fell apart literally while we were sitting there talking, and Crystal's like, "You got any tape?" Because this is how we fix things in our house. I do have tape today, right? But I didn't. We just went and got another headset because we have awesome techs in the back. Actually, give them a round of applause for all they do on a consistent basis. So, but this is usually how we fix most stuff, right? We kind of cram it in there. If it doesn't quite work, we're like, that doesn't fit. So we kick it shut. Anybody have a door right now with all the weather changes, hot and cold, that doesn't shut right? And how many you just like, well, it doesn't work, I'm just going to slam it really hard? Does that ever happen? Or you got a drawer that doesn't work, so you kind of shimmy it together, or you have all kinds of things. And so we tend to be people of the quick fix, right? That's kind of our idea. We're going to fix it quickly, and then we'll get to it later. That's kind of our mentality. And so we are thankful for duct tape and scissors, right, things like that. But really, in all honesty, we know this isn't a long-term solution, right? Can we all agree that duct tape is not a long-term solution? Is that okay to admit? Men in the room, this is not a long-term solution. So you may have a lot of stuff that's covered in gray, but it's not necessarily what it should be. So these quick fixes tend to be the way we want to do it. We want to just solve it that way. But really, in all honesty, it doesn't fix the problem. We have to get in there and redo some of the things that were once gone or once broken or once misshapen. We have to correct them. And that's what God does. God's not the God of a quick fix. Let me just tell you today, if you came here wanting to hear that God is going to snap his fingers and make everything perfect, then this is probably not the message for you. Because in all honesty, God can do that, but usually he wants to teach us something through that. And that means that he's not going to duct tape the problem. That means that he's going to work on you in a way so that things are corrected. And so I want us to really think about this today, that God is willing to restore us, but that's a painful part. How many of you have ever restored anything before, right? A car, maybe a house. It takes a lot of time. When we first moved into the house we had before, it was a rental house, and we had to tear up all the carpet and all that nice linoleum that everybody put down in the 70s. That was a bad choice, folks. Don't do that ever again. But let me just tell you, future generations, don't go back to that trend, right? Have you ever pulled that stuff up? What's underneath it? Yeah, goo and glue and I don't know what else, dog hair, whatever gets trapped under there. And if you've ever tried to take that stuff up, you'll need a sander, you'll need all kinds of stuff. And even then, you're like, it's still there, right? It's never the solution. Because restoration takes a lot of hard work. It takes us to kind of dig in and make changes. And let's face it, we don't really want to do that. It's hard. It's frustrating. And this is the hardest part, I think, of God's restoration for us, that when he begins to tweak on us and move us around and reshape the edges, this is the time when we usually bail, right? Because we're like, no, I don't want to do this. That's too much hard work. I'll accept your salvation. I'll do that. I'll accept the fact that you love me. But when you want to start restoring me back to that and start using me again, I don't like it because it's uncomfortable. I put duct tape on it, God, right? I solved this. I wedged something in there, and it's enough. It's holding it together, so I shouldn't have to fix it. But God says, no, that's not good enough. And over time, we become accustomed to living with these missing pieces. We talked about that last week, that ultimately we've kind of got used to it. And so what we do is we kind of shimmy things in there to just kind of hold it together good enough to hold the structure of the puzzle. And we say, that'll work. Right? Well, sometimes we fill it with things that don't matter, things that are not worthwhile. We try to put things that are going to be destructive to us down the road. And ultimately, God says, I'm going to need to remake those places so that the proper things can go where they need to. But our problem is that we've shoved something in there so many times, or we duct tape it, that when God tries to do it, there's just no room. And we might say, God, I really, really want to be loved, and so I filled it with a whole bunch of things, and God says, well, that's not what love is. Let me show you what love is. But we don't know how to receive that because it doesn't fit right anymore. Does that make sense? Sometimes we say, God, I really want to have an opportunity, but we've put so many things in there. When God tries to give us an opportunity, we blow it because it doesn't fit right. And we say, well, it's not fair. And God says, you're not ready. And this is the hard process of the preparation, is that God tells us sometimes we're just not ready yet. And we may think that we are, but really God has to reshape our heart, mind, and soul. He's doing a huge restoration. He's flipping the house, if you will, to get it ready for what's coming next. And sometimes we have to be patient through that. We have to allow God to do that. Once again, it can be challenging because really to trust him, we have to allow him to shape us. And understand that you didn't get this way overnight. You didn't lose these pieces all in a day. These pieces came apart slowly but surely, right? And so for us to do that, for us to be restored, we have to allow God to work on us. And it may take some time. It may take days. It may take months. It may take years. But ultimately, God has a plan in mind. God knows what he's going to do with the canvas. It's just going to take a little bit of time. So we can't be expected to be restored overnight. But the good news is that he is the ultimate restorer of all things, right? He knows what he's doing. He's got it. If you've ever done that, I know people always tell me all the time, if I want to fix something, just Google it. It doesn't work as well as I think it would. You've probably all tried those recipes or whatever. You try to copy it, and you're like, nailed it. No, you didn't. It looks bad. And so usually what you want to do, if you want to get the job right, you need a professional, someone that knows what they're doing, right? You're going to call someone that knows exactly what it does or how it works and get it done. And so we have the ultimate professional in God. We call on him, and we know that even though we may not fully understand what he's doing to shape those edges, we don't understand why it's not going faster, God knows, and he's working on you in a way. If he simply just shoved a few new pieces in, we probably aren't going to be ready to receive it. And that's what happens with Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was in hiding for a period of time, and we can say, well, David came to be king, and there should have been that period, right, when he went ahead and restored him. But instead, Mephibosheth was probably scared, frightened, looked poorly upon himself. He wasn't prepared to receive the blessing. And so on God's appointed time, he laid it on David's heart to reach out to Jonathan's son. And we can say, well, that's not fair. He should have had it but long before that. But what if? What if he came in and as a young man, Mephibosheth was being told over and over again, you should be king. We should overthrow David. Right? We should do that because now that you're here, we have a claim to the throne. And so that could have been what happened. But instead, God, at God's appointed time, he laid it on David's heart, and David ends up calling him in. And here's what he says to him. He says, I'd like to do something special for you in memory of your father Jonathan. We're still on point 1. To begin with, I'm returning to you all the properties your grandfather Saul. Furthermore, from now on, you'll take all your meals at my table. This is out of 2 Samuel 9, 7 through 12. And Mephibosheth ate at David's table, just like one of the royal family. More than likely, if anything had been done differently, there would have been a problem. It had to happen at the right time. God was working on the heart of David, and he was working on the heart of Mephibosheth, that the pieces would fall in line at the time it was ordained to be. And sometimes we have a lot of trouble with that because we think our timing is God's timing, but we may not be ready to receive it. You may not be ready to receive that next relationship. Some of you have been through a really rough time, maybe in a relationship, and that piece has been removed, and your automatic response is, well, I'll just jump into another relationship. How's that working out for you? Probably not so great, right? Sometimes we say to ourselves, man, I don't like what I'm doing now, so I'm not gonna think about it, I'm not gonna pray about it, I'm gonna jump into something else because I know what it's like to lose an opportunity, and then suddenly we're caught in something because we didn't really allow God to shape it and prepare it for us. And so today I'm gonna challenge you to allow God to work on you, and it's painful because that means we have to wait, and it means that we may not know exactly what's right. But when that opportunity comes, we'll know when to step into that. We'll know that God prepared it in the right way, in a way that maybe we didn't fully understand. I mean that we don't do anything about it. That means that you may need to start going to places that will shape you. Maybe you need to go to CR, or maybe you need to go to counseling, or maybe you need to confess. Maybe you need to do something that's going to challenge you outside of the box so God can shape you to be ready to receive those new pieces, because those pieces can't just be shoved in or duct taped in. We have to allow it. So allow God to reshape your edges so that he can place the right things in. The second one is this, that our conservator will fill in the gaps. That's the great thing about God, is he's not going to leave something empty if he wants it to be filled. Right? We saw this over and over again throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. Anytime there was an empty spot, God stepped in and he filled it with something beautiful. Right? He stepped in and he changed it in a way that we didn't fully understand. But ultimately, once the edges are prepared, then God begins to fill in the gaps. The truth of the matter is, and I hate to tell you this, is that some of the original pieces probably won't fit anymore. Right? I don't like to hear that, but it's true. Sometimes those missing pieces, even when we're found, don't necessarily fit. Sometimes they're damaged. Sometimes they're broken. Sometimes they're bent. But ultimately, with the restoration that God brings, we have to understand that he will give us something new. We want God to make it all better, but sometimes we just need something new in our pieces. I was looking online, how do people fix the situation with puzzle pieces besides calling and yelling at the puzzle company? And what they do is, a lot of times they'll take pieces of the cardboard box, and they'll put it underneath the puzzle, and then they'll trace out the line, then they'll kind of color it in generally, and then they'll stick it in there. You're laughing. Have you done this? Okay. All right. So that's what they'll do. So the puzzle's completed. They will create a new piece and put it in there. It's not the same piece, but it fills in the gap and restores the picture. So it's not just this blank hole in the middle of your puzzle. It's just a way to do it. And I think that's what God does as well, that God sees these places in our life, and he wants to finish the picture. Guys, some relationships can be restored, but some can't. Sometimes you say to yourself, well, I messed up really, really bad, so I'm just going to go back to this because that's what I know. But that may not be the puzzle piece that you need to fill that life. I know a lot of times I've had people that have dealt with abuse in their life, and all they want is for the abuser, usually it's a family member, to love them back. They're like, if they could just love me back, I'm going to forgive them, and then when I forgive them, then ultimately this is going to restore that relationship. But I'll tell you, every time, at least to the point I've seen, it has never turned out well, because it's just brought up a lot of the same hurt, the same feelings. Now, forgiveness is important, but sometimes forgiveness is not the same thing as reconciliation. Sometimes we don't have to have that person back in our life. Sometimes we're trying to force fit something that's not there. Some of you have been, once again, in a relationship that just didn't work out, and you're still pining for that relationship. You're still searching on Facebook or whatever. You know, let it go. There's a reason it didn't work out in the first place. Some of you are still beating yourself up for opportunities you missed with your kids, and now they're all grown up and older, and God's saying, you can't go back to that. I'm sorry. It doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with your kids, but you're not going to fix them or do the things that you want to do with them, because, let's face it, that time has passed. Those moments have passed, and that's okay. Some of you may be thinking, well, what about those opportunities that I had? And I still want to have that. I still want to claim it. God says maybe there's new opportunities. Because let's face it, sometimes we can't go back to the original piece. It's just not there anymore. It's not acceptable anymore. Or sometimes those pieces of our lives have passed on and we missed that window. And that's hard for us. I get that. But in truth, God will bring us new pieces that will take the place of those things. If we're willing to allow him to bring those new pieces in. And those new things can be even more beautiful than we realize. You know, as we think about that picture that we showed earlier, underneath it were the water lilies, and on top of it was the wisteria. And just now knowing that there is the water lilies underneath brought up more value to it, you know. But on top of it's still a wisteria. And I think there's something even prettier personally about the wisteria because of that. Because of this idea that there's something new there. Because he wanted to try something new. And so in truth, those things may be more beautiful. Maybe God's going to bring you a new family. Yes, maybe you made some choices that separated you from your family in the past, but God might be bringing you a new family. And that family may not live in the same house as you, but that family may live in this congregation with you. Or this family may live in the neighborhood with you. And God's saying, pour into them, show them what you've learned, and allow me to bring those pieces back into place because of that. Maybe it's a child. As we said before, sometimes there's that lack or that feeling that they've just gone on. And I know my mom, who I love very much, who's going to be watching this later, so I have to be careful what I say. But, you know, she sometimes she's like, I just wish you were closer. I wish you were there with me. And I say, yeah, I do too. But that doesn't mean that you can't reach out there. And there's a friend of hers now that's my age that apparently I went to school with. I forgot I went to school with her. Sorry. And and she's spending time with her now, and she's like, it's kind of nice. It's like, you know, besides her being a girl, but she's like having you there with me. And so that's cool because she's found people that she can pour into. Just because we're gone doesn't mean that hole is there. God's going to restore that place in life. And maybe a job. Right now you're thinking, man, I really, maybe you lost a job or you lost an opportunity. And God's saying, that opportunity's coming up. It may not be exactly what you had before, but it'll be the right fit for you because I'm going to do something beautiful with it. And we need to be open and available to what God is going to do. We cannot just close ourselves off, because when God begins to shape it, we say, no, I know what I want there. God says, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, but I know what's best for you. Sometimes we have to be reminded of that our Lord, our Creator, the one who painted us, the one who put the puzzle pieces together, knows what's best for us. And because of that, when he does something new, we're going to have to realize that when he steps in and gives us those opportunities, we need to take those opportunities. Not hold on to the old things, but allow him to make something new in our life. We have to be available to it because what we have planned may not be what God has planned. Notice this, that Mephibosheth addresses this. Samuel's talking to him, and this is after the betrayal. We talked about that later on. So he's been eating at the table of the king, and now Ziba, the servant, has betrayed him. He basically made Mephibosheth look really, really bad. You may remember that from last week. And David's like, where were you? And he calls upon Mephibosheth. David calls him up, and he says, why would you do this? Why weren't you here? And here's what his response is, Mephibosheth's response. He says, but my master, the king, has been like one of God's angels. He's talking about David. He knew what was right, and he did it. Wasn't everyone in my father's house doomed? But you took me in and gave me a place at your table. What more could I ever expect or ask? Guys, sometimes we have to realize that those cracks in our life that have occurred are not the be-all, end-all. That God loves us enough to restore us and bring those things back. And he's basically saying, as he trusts David, he says, David, what more could I ask? You've stepped in and you've done everything as the king because you love me. And because you love me, I know that you did what was right. He says that you took me in, you gave me, and you did what was right, and everything in my house was doomed, but you stepped in and restored it. And so today we need to be reminded of that those cracks, those places in our life that were lost can be filled with something new because his grace can come into those cracks. You may have royally messed up in some way, shape, or form in your life, but that does not mean that you're messed up forever. Your testimony, remember we talked about your mess can become his message last week, that ultimately your testimony, your story, maybe you can do something different. Maybe you can reach out to a child that needs a parent because maybe the first time around wasn't so great. Maybe you can reach out to a family that needs somebody that can pour into them. Maybe your testimony can prevent someone from going down that other road because God's going to bring something new and make your picture whole. And a lot of you guys already understand that today. And I hope you can continue to understand that whenever God fills those spaces in our life, we need to be grateful. They may not be exactly what we think they should be, but they're going to be something amazing if we allow him to do it. And the third thing is this, that our conservator will restore the image. You know, at the end of the day, as we look at this puzzle, this is supposed to be pinwheels. You probably can't see it from there. But when you first start putting a puzzle together, if you didn't have the box, it would just be a jumbled mess, right? You just try to, so we go by that picture that we have. And the Bible is basically our roadmap, not only to God, but what he wants us to be. He's called us to be his children. He's told us we're valuable. He's told us we're worthy. He's told us that we are all called to be ministers of the gospel, right? In a different way and different things. But ultimately, God wants to restore that image for us. But we're so busy looking at the other images that we miss out on the fact of what he's doing. See, one day you're going to become gallery worthy, and the truth of the matter is you already are. You know, whenever my kids were little and they would draw something, I would hang it up on the fridge, right? Because the fridge was the display place of God's kindness. And today I'm going to say that the world is God's fridge, if you will, that he put you on the earth. He stuck you here with gravity, which is like a magnet. Sure, we'll go with that analogy. And so he put you here on this earth so that his glory can be seen because you are representative of him. And he's proud of his children. He's proud of what you've done. He's proud of what you're going to do. And ultimately, all our faults and missteps are still there, but God still loves it, right? When I hung the kids' pictures on the fridge, they weren't Monet, but they were beautiful to me. And so I hope today you realize that God thinks of that the same way, that all those things are there, but ultimately we have to declare the victory as God has made you fearfully and wonderfully made. I know that this message, a lot of times these two messages is going to be one of those things where you're going to hear it and you're going to want to walk out of here and say, that sounds good for everybody else but for me. Because you don't know how badly my puzzle's messed up. You don't know how many pieces I'm missing. You don't know how many problems I have. You don't know all those things, Brian. You don't know me. And the truth is I don't, but God does. And God knows where everything is and what it was intended to be and how he's going to make something beautiful. He does not throw a canvas away, right? He may have started you with water lilies, but at the end of the day, you're still going to be a wisteria. And you're going to be beautiful because you're going to allow God to work in your life. And whenever you accept Christ in your life, when you say, God, I want you to start shaping me, and I know it's going to hurt, I know it's going to be painful, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but shape those places, God. And I know that there's going to be times in our life whenever we're struggling because we want it a certain way, and God says, no, I'm going to put something else in its place now. And we're going to fight against that. But at the end of the day, God's goal is to restore the image because it speaks to his glory. Not to our glory, but to his glory. And so God desires that of us. And so I wanted to challenge you today that you may have others that are going to say you're no different. One of the biggest compliments I ever got whenever I was called to be a pastor, I went to a conference with a guy who I went to college with, and he was like, so what are you doing? I said, well, I'm working, I'm about to be hired on staff at a church, Fresh Start, and this is a long time ago. And he said, you're going to be a pastor? Like that. And I was like, I know. It's crazy. Because to me it was a compliment. Because God took something that should not have been and he made something new because we trusted him with it, right? And I think that's the thing. We should be rejoicing the fact that God is willing to restore those things. And you may have some people that you know, family members and friends and people you ran with are going to say, oh, you're still broke, man. You don't know the Lord. Lord's not going to fix you. You're not worthwhile. You're trash. You're too problematic, all those things. But the truth of the matter is you know, and you've got to know the healing power of God. You can know that and believe that even when the enemy shows up and he tries to show you all your spots, that you know God has come along and he is filling or has filled those spaces with something new. Once we can celebrate what God has done and is doing, our priorities kind of fall in line because we realize it's not about us. Mephibosheth, at the end of this, he's talking to David, and basically David makes an interesting ruling here. So kind of lay it out. So remember, Ziba was his servant, and basically they were kind of related through the process, but Ziba then takes and tricks Mephibosheth. He tells him he's going to saddle up, then he goes and makes peace with David, and then David calls Mephibosheth out, and he says, well, I was crippled, so ultimately you got to forgive me. And David says, well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take half, because Ziba was at least loyal enough to come, and you weren't, so I'm going to give half of it to you and half of it to Ziba. Now for us, that's kind of a shocking thing. That doesn't seem fair at all. Remember we talked about fairness of the king? But really, he's doing it because I think he's testing Mephibosheth. He's saying, how loyal are you? Are you going to get upset? But instead, here's what Mephibosheth says. He says, that is enough. And then this is what David says, say no more. Here's my decision. You and Ziba divide the property between you. And Mephibosheth says this. I love this part. He says, oh, let him have it all. All I care about is that my master, the king, is home safe and sound. This is an amazing moment. This is a turnaround for Mephibosheth. He was scared and broken and hurt, and now he has a place. And his place isn't about wealth. His place isn't about filling the holes of his life with something else. His place now is about celebrating the king and his master, because he knows what's worthwhile. He's seen the beauty of the portrait of his life, and he says, no matter what I have to give, if it's nothing or everything, I'm just glad that I get to serve you. Isn't that a beautiful moment? When Mephibosheth says to him, he says, I don't care. Take the wealth. I didn't have it before. I'm not going to have it again. That's all right. All I care about is that my master, the king, is home safe and sound. And today, I want us to realize that when God restores these things to us, we've been holding on to hurt for so long and pain for so long that we have forgotten the fact that really it's about letting God have it all. He's the one that made the picture in the first place. He's the one that put the puzzle in the box. He's the one that made all the pieces. And even when one piece is missing, he still sees the beauty of the picture. And he is willing to restore that picture if we're willing to allow him to shape us and change us. And then ultimately through that, we've got to hold on to the fact. And it may be hard on some days to hold on to the fact that he is still going to hang you on the fridge. He's still going to hang you up in the art museum because you were worthwhile. You may have started out as a water lily, and you may end up as a wisteria, but you are still of the same value God created you with, if you're willing to allow him to work in you. So today I'm going to challenge you with that, with Deuteronomy 30:35. It says, God, your God, will restore everything you lost. He'll have compassion on you. He'll come back and pick up the pieces from all the places where you were scattered. No matter how far away you end up, God, your God, God, your God will get you out of there and bring you back to the land your ancestors once possessed. It will be yours again. He will give you a good life. I want to ask the worship team to come up. We're going to do something a little different today to kind of show how that works. And so I've asked several people if they'll come line up over here on the side to share a little bit, but share in a different kind of way. Sometimes we need to be reminded that we're not the only one with missing pieces. Amen? We're not. And sometimes we need to be reminded that God not only has taken those missing pieces, but he has restored those missing pieces. So I've asked a few people to come up today, and they're going to do something, and you may have seen it before as a cardboard testimony, but they're going to be showing a piece that was missing in their life and how God restored it. And so I'm just asked today that this is kind of our lead into our prayer. And as they come up today, however you want to celebrate that. If you want to clap, if you want to shout, if you want to say hallelujah, or maybe in your mind you're thinking, man, I wish I had a piece of cardboard too to show what God has done. Whatever that looks like today, I'm going to ask that you just give your attention to this, and then we'll close up with the service today. So come on forward and share. This, excuse me, it's hard not to get emotional, right? May this testimony today be all of our testimonies. May you all realize that the front of your card is not the end of your story. That God has restored the pieces if you allow him. God is shaping you right now. Guys, don't leave here today forgetting that fact that God wants to restore the missing pieces of your life. They may be big, they may be small, but your God loves you enough to not leave you where you're at. We need to confess. We need to open up. We need to say, God, shape me. It may be painful, but shape me. Put new things in those places. And God, may I be this beautiful piece of art that you are proud to show. My water lilies may be gone, but my wisteria is ready, right? And so I'm